Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the most valuable resource beneath your country's soil no longer truly belongs to your people. Imagine watching foreign companies grow unimaginably wealthy while your own citizens struggle with poverty. Now imagine electing a leader who finally decides to change that reality, only to be overthrown in a secret operation planned thousands of miles away. It sounds like the plot of a political thriller. But it isn't. This is the true story of Iran in 1953, a story of oil, empire, espionage, and one of the most influential covert operations in modern history. More than 70 years later, its consequences continue to shape relations between Iran and the United States, influence conflicts across the Middle East, and affect global politics. At the center of this story stood one man, Mohammad Mossadegh. To millions of Iranians, he was a patriot determined to reclaim his country's sovereignty. To Britain, he threatened one of the empire's most valuable strategic assets. And to the United States, he eventually became a target during the height of the Cold War. But to understand why an elected prime minister became the focus of an international conspiracy, we have to go back to the beginning of the 20th century, long before the coup, long before the Cold War, and before anyone realized how valuable oil would become. At the time, Persia, modern-day Iran, was a largely agricultural kingdom with little industrial development. Few people suspected that beneath its deserts lay one of the world's richest oil reserves. Everything changed in 1901. A British entrepreneur named William Knox D'Arcy negotiated an agreement with the Persian Shah. In exchange for a relatively small payment, company shares, and a promise of future royalties, D'Arcy received exclusive rights to search for oil across an enormous area of the country. For years, the gamble appeared to be a failure. Drilling teams searched relentlessly but found nothing. Investors grew impatient. Money was running out, and the entire project seemed close to collapse. Then, in 1908, drilling crews struck oil near Masjid-e-Suleiman. The discovery transformed Persia overnight. Within a year, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was established. Decades later, that company would become British Petroleum, BP. For Britain, the discovery promised enormous wealth and strategic security. For ordinary Iranians, however, very little changed. The importance of Persian oil increased dramatically in 1914. At that time, Winston Churchill, serving as Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, made one of the most important military decisions of the 20th century. He ordered the Royal Navy to transition from coal-powered ships to oil-powered warships. Oil-powered vessels were faster, traveled farther, and required fewer sailors. But Britain lacked sufficient domestic oil reserves. The solution was obvious. The British government purchased a controlling stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, ensuring direct access to Persia's oil. From that moment onward, Iranian oil became far more than a commercial resource. It became essential to Britain's military strength and global empire. Protecting that oil supply became a national priority. And anyone who threatened it would eventually be viewed as a threat to British interests. Nowhere was this inequality more visible than in Abadan, home to one of the largest oil refineries in the world. The refinery generated extraordinary profits. Yet those profits rarely reached the people whose land produced the oil. British engineers and executives lived in comfortable neighborhoods with electricity, clean water, gardens, swimming pools, and modern facilities. Meanwhile, many Iranian workers lived in overcrowded settlements lacking reliable sanitation, electricity, and basic public services. These workers operated one of the world's most valuable industries. Yet many returned home each evening to conditions of extreme poverty. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Iran possessed extraordinary natural wealth. But much of that wealth flowed overseas. By the late 1940s, public frustration had reached a boiling point. Financial figures only deepened the resentment. The oil company earned millions of pounds in profits every year. Iran received only a small share. Many Iranians realized that the British government was collecting more money through taxes on the company than Iran itself received in royalties from its own oil. To many people, this no longer resembled a fair business agreement. It looked like exploitation. Then another event changed everything. In neighboring Saudi Arabia, an American oil company agreed to share profits equally with the Saudi government. If Saudi Arabia could negotiate a far better deal, why couldn't Iran? That single question ignited a nationwide movement. Its strongest voice belonged to Mohammad Mossadegh. Unlike many political leaders of his era, Mossadegh was not a military strongman. He was a lawyer educated in Europe, a committed constitutionalist, and a lifelong nationalist who believed that every independent nation had the right to control its own natural resources. His speeches inspired students, workers, merchants, religious leaders, and politicians from very different backgrounds. They did not agree on everything. But they agreed on one fundamental principle. Iran's oil should belong to Iran. By 1951, public pressure became impossible to ignore. Iran's parliament voted unanimously to nationalize the country's oil industry. Not a single member voted against the proposal. Soon afterward, Mohammad Mossadegh became prime minister and officially signed the nationalization law. Across the country, celebrations erupted. Many believed they were witnessing the birth of true economic independence. For the first time, the nation's greatest natural resource would belong to its own people. But in London, officials saw the decision very differently. To Britain, nationalization threatened decades of investment and one of the empire's most valuable strategic assets. The British government was determined to reverse it, whatever the cost. Britain responded immediately, but not with an invasion. Instead, it launched an economic war against Iran. A global boycott of Iranian oil was organized, Western companies refused to buy it, and the Royal Navy helped enforce the embargo. Within months, Iran's oil exports collapsed, government revenue disappeared, and the country's economy fell into crisis. Despite the pressure, Mossadegh refused to back down. Instead, he defended Iran's case before the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, arguing that every nation had the right to control its own natural resources. Although the court declined Britain's complaint, the embargo continued, and Iran's economy remained under severe strain. Everything changed in January 1953 when Dwight D. Eisenhower became President of the United States. Britain warned Washington that Mossadegh's government might eventually fall under communist influence. Although American intelligence believed an immediate communist takeover was unlikely, Cold War fears convinced U.S. leaders that action was necessary. The CIA and Britain's MI6 secretly planned Operation Ajax, a mission designed to remove Mossadegh without sending an army. In July 1953, CIA officer Kermit Roosevelt Jr. arrived in Tehran under a false identity. The operation relied on propaganda, bribery, paid demonstrations, and support from military officers and influential political figures. The goal was to make Mossadegh's government appear as though it was collapsing from within. The first attempt, on August 15, failed completely. Mossadegh learned of the plot in advance, arrested key officers, and the Shah fled the country. Even the CIA believed the mission was over and ordered Roosevelt to leave Iran. He refused. Instead, Roosevelt reorganized the operation. More money was distributed, more supporters were recruited, and another attempt was prepared. On August 19, 1953, thousands gathered in Tehran. Some supported the Shah, while others had been paid to protest. Soon, military units joined the uprising. Tanks surrounded Mossadegh's residence, heavy fighting broke out, and by the end of the day his government had fallen. Mossadegh surrendered the next day, ending Iran's first experiment with democratic control over its oil industry. General Fazlollah Zahedi became prime minister, and the Shah returned to power with American and British backing. In 1954, a new oil agreement placed control of Iran's petroleum industry back into the hands of Western companies, even though Iran officially retained ownership. The Shah ruled for another 25 years, supported by the United States. During this period, his secret police, SAVAK, became known for censorship, surveillance, arrests, and torture. Opposition was crushed, but resentment continued to grow. That resentment finally exploded in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. Later that year, militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, an act deeply connected to memories of the 1953 coup. Even today, tensions between Iran and the West cannot be fully understood without remembering Operation Ajax. What began as a struggle over oil ended up reshaping Middle Eastern politics for generations. Sometimes, the most powerful events in history aren't fought on battlefields. They're decided in secret, and their consequences echo for decades.